Picture this. The year is 1800, and you've stepped into the dusty boots of a pioneer bone hunter. You unearth a colossal jawbone studded with nightmare-inducing teeth, undeniably a dinosaur. Yet, you remain oblivious to that fact, given the era. To reconstruct the beast, your only tools are raw speculation and a healthy dose of artistic license, a common practice back then. Frankly, whenever we recover shattered or degraded scraps, science becomes a game of connecting the dots. Occasionally, though, fate smiles upon us, delivering a fossil so pristine and intact that speculation becomes unnecessary. The creature is undeniable. For my money, these discoveries are the closest we'll ever get to hopping in a time machine, offering a vivid window into the ancient world. It seems the deeper we dig into the past, the more magical the find, cracking open a door to eras we assumed were lost forever. A prime example involves the humble troglodyte. Scratch that. I mean trilobite. If you haven't heard of these critters, you really should have, considering they were Earth's early heavy hitters. This arthropod family boasted over 22,000 distinct species. That puts even the variety of modern birds to shame. Because of that immense genetic range, trilobites conquered every niche, varying wildly in size, habitat, and physical quirks, evolving into hunters, scavengers, filter feeders, and even drifting planktonic forms. Theory suggests they burst onto the scene in the early Cambrian, roughly 521 million years back, putting them closer to the 1 billion year mark than to today, a staggering thought. In those days, a global map would look unrecognizable compared to ours. Thus, it is a miracle we even know they existed. Yet, we have moved beyond mere awareness to understanding their exact appearance. A stunning find in Morocco unveiled a cluster of trilobites so fresh they look like recent casualties, rather than fossils from 500 million years ago. You likely know the tale of Pompeii, where a catastrophic eruption obliterated the Roman city, claiming thousands of lives while ironically entombing the victims in pyroclastic ash for eternity. That history is crucial here, because 500 million years ago, a nearly identical disaster unfolded. On the Moroccan coastline, a massive volcano blew its top, spewing lava and superheated gas into the sea, where it rudely crashed a party of unsuspecting trilobites. Calling it an interruption is putting it mildly. The volcanic waves struck with such blinding speed that it flash froze them, capturing every detail of their soft tissues in glorious 3 dimensions, a rarity for creatures that are typically found flattened like pancakes. This 3-dimensional preservation provides tangible models we can essentially handle, offering a depth that flat fossils simply lack. Furthermore, the ash that slammed into them hit with enough pressure to force scorching volcanic sludge into their guts. Gruesome, sure, but a goldmine for science, as it perfectly cast their internal digestive systems, a precedent for the species. This revealed never-before-seen anatomy, like a labrum fused to a hypostome, a narrow mouth opening, and specialized limbs situated adjacent to the jaw, likely evolved to funnel nutrients into their gullets. In another groundbreaking twist, the volcano preserved more than just the hosts. It captured the hitchhikers on their shells. Minuscule creatures, specifically Cambrian brachiopods, were discovered clinging to the exoskeletons, rooting themselves to legs and armor using fleshy stalks. An absolutely stellar discovery. The marvels of the trilobite world don't stop there. The fossil record is teeming with other gems. Take, for instance, 2 Triarthrus eatoni specimens, found entirely intact and in mint condition, courtesy of a freak burial. These critters roam during the Upper Ordovician across vast ranges. However, in the Beecher's trilobite bed of New York, their end came uniquely. Trapped in frequent ancient mudslides saturated with iron pyrite. Turns out, this particular material is magic for keeping things intact, which gave us 2 flawless specimens. It is absolutely metal, and I mean that literally, no pun intended. Thanks to this so-called solution, we didn't just get complete trilobites. We got the works. Preserved gills, antennae, eggs, guts, and even legs frozen mid-step. Finding just one of those details is rare, but finding the whole package? That is straight-up brain-melting. Now, it definitely helps that there was a sheer abundance of trilobite species swimming around for ages, leaving plenty behind. But honestly, you do not need 20,000 unique species to get a spectacular fossil. Just ask the Lystrosaurus, a beast that gets weirder the more I dig into it. These small to medium critters were once the undisputed champs of Earth, ruling over early Triassic Pangea against all odds. Sure, they didn't have the variety of the trilobites, but they conquered the map. They were incredibly capable survivors. To put it in perspective, in some spots, they made up a staggering 95% of all life. We just do not see that kind of dominance. Not before, and definitely not since. But that is not the only cool fact about the Lystrosaurus. Turns out, they are fantastic at fossilizing too, as of right now, a single Lystrosaurus holds the world record for the oldest mummy ever found. Nobody else is even close. Back in 2022, scientists found a body that defied all logic. It clocked in at 250 million years old, but looked incredible. I mean, I have seen roadkill in worse shape. This game-changing find happened in South Africa's Karoo Basin. Today, it is a dry, semi-desert wasteland. Not exactly fun, but still a paradise compared to the early Triassic. Back then, it was a nightmare of blistering heat and endless droughts. Ironically, experts think we have those hellish conditions to thank for this specimen's existence. The leading theory is that this poor guy got stuck in a megadrought, died, dried out, and basically pulled a natural Egyptian mummy act. That rapid drying process is what preserved not just the shape, but the actual texture of its skin. Which is wild considering the immense age of the thing. This mummy dropped some major knowledge bombs too. We learned that even though it wasn't a mammal or a reptile, the Lystrosaurus had a hide like a rhino or hippo, rather than the scaly armor of a dinosaur. We also learned they were hairless and covered in dimples. And just when you think it can't get any cooler, we found out this guy didn't die alone. Right next to it, the excavation crew unearthed 7 other bodies in amazing condition, including a second mummy. Dying together in a cluster tells a grim story. While Mr. Lystrosaurus clearly survived the worst extinction event ever to become Earth's MVP, life was definitely not a walk in the park. Droughts likely wiped them out in droves, and some researchers think those brutal early Triassic conditions eventually led to their total extinction. Now, these mummies and the trilobites are what we call ultra-preserved, because they kept their whole bodies. But here is the kicker. You do not need the whole animal to have a world-class fossil. You know, sometimes keeping your legacy alive requires just one part of you to survive the ages, which is perfectly proven by what I rank as the wildest fossil discovery of all time. It is a specimen that truly highlights the terrifying nature of these ancient beasts. Where would you expect to dig up a monster like that? Well, if you guessed Australia, solid try. But nope, we actually found this beast in the United Kingdom. Maybe not your first guess, since the island is famous for gray skies, rain, and a distinct lack of giant man-eaters. Well, excluding people, obviously. But millions of years ago in the Jurassic, the vibe was completely different. We are talking tropical islands and lush greenery everywhere, and the warm, shallow oceans surrounding them, teeming with life, including nightmare predators like the giant pliosaurs, the undisputed kings of those seas. In 2022, a stunning find reminded us of their power. A team spotted a massive skull in a bizarre spot, hanging out of a sheer cliff face. Can you imagine peering over the edge and seeing that staring back at you? Scarier than the height itself. Naturally, that skull belonged to a pliosaur, which was pretty easy to identify. Researchers are calling the condition of the skull absolutely pristine, celebrating it as arguably the finest marine reptile fossil ever discovered from that era. It clocks in at a massive 2 meters, or 6 feet, making it a contender for the largest pliosaur skull on record. The beast it came from was likely a titan, stretching over 10 meters, or 33 feet, and weighing several tons. The head was found intact, but the feature that really dropped jaws among paleontologists was the dental work. Honestly, calling them teeth is an understatement. They are basically organic steak knives. Despite being 150 million years old, they remain sharp enough to slice your skin if you aren't careful. You can actually see the microscopic details, from the serrated edges to the distinct vertical ridges, which paint a gruesome picture of how this monster hunted. Those grooves were designed to break suction, preventing the pastor, fangs, from getting stuck in flesh. This means it wasn't a bite-and-hold predator, but one that delivered. Rapid-fire, slashing attacks meant to severe limbs and cause massive hemorrhaging. It was a nightmare for prey, and the situation only gets worse when you look at the power behind those jaws. Analysis indicates a bite force, double that of a modern saltwater crocodile. Pure bone-crushing power. Beyond the terrifying teeth, we found more evidence of this creature's efficiency. CT scans showed that the sensory pits on its snout were perfectly preserved, revealing connections to a complex network of blood vessels and nerves that existed in life, acting as a biological radar to detect pressure waves in the water. This allowed it to ambush victims even in zero-visibility mud. Hold on to your hats, though, because while we wait for more news, the team behind the dig is convinced the rest of the skeleton is still hiding right there in the cliff face. So, yeah, I'm crossing my fingers so hard they are turning blue. We have talked about individual fossils, but imagine an entire location legendary for keeping everything locked in time with perfect clarity. Welcome to the world of Lagerstätten. Good luck with the spelling bee on that one. It is not a specific fossil name, but a type of geological site famous for exceptional preservation. This usually happens in zones that were starved of oxygen, meaning no bacteria existed to rot the carcasses. We have found these fossil gold mines all over the globe, covering almost every era of history. But there is one site that stands head and shoulders above the rest, reigning as the basked celebrity of paleontology. It is ancient, yet the quality blows even younger sites out of the water. What makes it mind-bending is that it preserved squishy, soft-bodied creatures. I am talking about the Burgess Shale in the Canadian Rockies. This place is a snapshot of our planet from over 500 million years ago, 508 million to be exact. The preservation here is so distinct it spawned its own category, known as Burgess Shale type preservation, setting the gold standard for fossilizing creatures without bones, including the Cambrian explosion's weirdest experiments. It makes the area feel less like Earth's past and more like a sci-fi movie set. We have found things like the first intact Anomalocaris, impeccable traces of the spiky hallucigenia, and pristine examples of Autoya, a bizarre worm that looks like a prop from a creature feature. The detail is so high, it gets practically intimate, letting us see exactly what this thing looked like in life. It retained the circular rings on its skin and that nightmare fuel proboscis. And the head? Fuzzy. Not cute fuzzy, we are talking fleshy spines. Delicious. Those are the greatest hits. But the catalog goes on forever. I have cherry-picked a few personal favorites to highlight, like Amischia, where you can see the fins and even the gut contents. Then there is Wywaxia, basically a tank slug covered in armor, and Aishea, a worm-like ancestor to arthropods, complete with tiny legs and digestive tracts. We also found bivalved arthropods with pincers and Burgessia, where the kidney-shaped stomach is clearly outlined. And do not forget Stanleycaris, which actually had preserved brain tissue. Yes, a 500 million-year-old brain. It is mind-blowing. We would be here all day if I listed everything. But the bottom line is this. Finding fossilized muscles, internal organs, and exoskeletons is just another Tuesday at this site, including what these creatures actually ate for their last meal. It is truly mind-blowing stuff, and usually, the Cambrian period takes the crown for these types of pristine discoveries. However, Lagerstätten isn't the only preservation game in town. There is another method that holds up exceptionally well, and it looks like something ripped straight out of a Hollywood script. Yeah, I am talking about amber. This fossilized tree resin has gifted us some insane finds, like an ancient flea carrying the bubonic plague, a Cretaceous spider frozen mid-jump while attacking a wasp, an entire salamander, and hands down the most flawless arthropods you will ever see, dating back a staggering 230 million years to the Jurassic era. But honestly, as wild as those are, I don't think they take the top spot. There is another massive amber discovery that absolutely deserves its own spotlight. To me, this find represents the ultimate potential of amber and basically fulfills all my childhood dinosaur fantasies. This isn't just a fossil. It is a strong contender for the best preserved dinosaur fragment in history. We are talking about a legit dino stuck in tree sap. Now, you usually do not expect to find dinosaurs trapped in amber. You expect the bugs that bit them, right? But in this case, the dinosaur wasn't the victim of a mosquito, it was the victim of the tree itself. Or, at least, a piece of it was. Back in 2015, a miner found a weird chunk of amber that looked like it had some old plant matter stuck inside. He actually polished the thing up to sell it as jewelry and hauled it off to the market. But, thank goodness, right before he sold it, he decided to let a scientist take one last look at it because something about it felt off. And what a phenomenal choice that turned out to be. Analysis showed it wasn't a plant at all, it was animal tissue. Specifically, dinosaur tissue. This was obviously earth-shattering news because finding organic material from that era is rare enough, let alone a chunk of a dinosaur. I would argue this is the most pristine piece of dino anatomy we possess, considering the bones, muscle, skin, and yes, even the feathers were all locked in place. It isn't a perfect snapshot of life, but it is. Seriously impressive given that this creature roamed the planet roughly 99 million years ago. And here's the kicker. The owner of this tail wasn't a bird. It was a non-avian theropod, similar to a T-Rex. Specifically, it is believed to be a coelurosaur. In other words, while we are missing the specific species name, we know it belonged to the clade containing theropods, more closely related to birds than to other carnivores. We know for a fact it wasn't a bird, because the vertebrae and tail were not fused into a rod, or pygostyle, like you see in modern pigeons. Because of this, the tail was highly flexible and whip-like, with feathers running down both sides. Miraculously, we could even determine the color, as the feathers were preserved well enough to show chestnut brown on top and white underneath. Combine that with the fact that all the soft tissue is still there, and you realize you are staring at a real dinosaur tail in high definition. It is a claim you can actually make now. I touched on this in my other amber video, so you might already know the drill. Another crazy detail about this specimen is that the fluids, or what used to be fluids, were still inside the sample. Studies revealed traces of ferrous iron. Translation, we have dinosaur blood. Now, don't get too excited because on a molecular level, the DNA is basically useless for cloning. So, no Jurassic Park anytime soon. But it is still a huge discovery because it implies the poor creature was likely alive when the sap hit it, making this the first and only known case of a dinosaur meeting its end by sticky amber trap. Rough way to go. You might be wondering, how does a dinosaur get stuck like a bug? The answer comes down to size. This coelurosaur was definitely a little guy, likely a juvenile, and estimated to be no bigger than a modern sparrow. It is funny how the smallest things can change our understanding of the world. Eventually, paleontologists even learned something new about bird evolution thanks to this find, noting that its feathers lacked a central shaft, known as the rachis, which all modern birds have. However, it did have barbs, which proves that feather barbs evolved before the central shaft did. Pretty neat stuff. And if you want to dive deeper into crazy prehistoric finds, I suggest you check out my video where I did a whole segment on dinosaur mummies, which are pretty gnarly in their own right. Anyway, it is obvious that amber is a champion at preserving history, just like the Lagerstätten sites. But in some ways, they both get crushed by a method that feels like cheating: permafrost. We are talking about soil or sediment that has remained frozen solid for at least 2 years. Now, 2 years isn't exactly ancient history, but some of this ice has been holding its breath for much, much longer. The oldest known permafrost is about 700,000 years old, and scientists are pulling some absolute madness out of that deep freeze. We're talking about the ultimate frozen time capsules from the Ice Age. But if you had to pick the absolute superstar of that era, what would it be? Let's be honest, you're picturing a woolly mammoth. That's the icon. So, it shouldn't shock you that the most perfect specimen ever found is a mammoth pulled straight from the Siberian permafrost. Her name is Yuka. Now, pause for a second. You might be thinking, wait, is a frozen mummy really a fossil? I don't want to get boggy in the details, but here's the rule. A fossil is any evidence of prehistoric life older than 10,000 years. Luckily, Yuka clears that bar easily. When they dug her up in Siberia back in 2010, she was dated at 39,000 years old. She was a juvenile during the Upper Paleolithic. Yet looking at her, you'd swear she died just a few centuries ago, or maybe even sooner. The preservation is mind-blowing. Because the freezing permafrost turned her into a natural mummy, her entire body, skin, fur, and all was locked in time. The condition is so pristine we actually have scans of her brain, which prove that mammoth brains are built just like modern elephants, although Yuka's had lost about 55% of its volume due to the mummification drying process. Still, it's not every day you get to examine a brain from the Ice Age. As of right now, it is the only intact one in existence. Thanks to her, we also know that mammoth calves sported strawberry blonde coats. Researchers even managed to draw blood from her carcass, and I'm talking about actual liquid blood. That was a historic first. But while the blood is wild, what the scientists did with her cells is straight up science fiction. In one experiment, they successfully stimulated the nuclei to show signs of biological activity again. It is absolutely insane. It honestly feels like the first chapter of Jurassic Park. However, beyond the scientific triumph, there's a tragedy here. Yuka was basically a toddler, probably no older than 6, which leads to the big mystery. What happened to her? Initially, claw marks on her hide suggested a lion attack. Yes, lions actually roamed Siberia back then. The theory was that predators or even ancient humans killed her but left the body to freeze. But the current consensus clears the humans and lions. We think nature itself was the killer. The Ice Age was brutal. The leading theory is that while crossing a swampy area, Yuka got stuck in the mud and drowned. The freezing water preserved her instantly, creating an accidental masterpiece. Now, here is the kicker. While Yuka is the queen of mammoths, she isn't the best preserved creature from the Ice Age. That title belongs to an animal that is even older, dating back 42,000 years. Our story heads back to Siberia, to the year 2018. Ivory hunters were digging around the Batagaica crater, the largest depression of permafrost on the planet. They were blasting the mud banks with water hoses when one hunter spotted something sticking out. In an area like that, you expect to find bone fragments or scraps. Everyone assumed it was just another piece of debris, but what they pulled out was an entire 100% complete horse. I'm talking everything intact: hooves, skin, tail, even the tiny hairs on the face. It was over 40,000 years old, yet the inside was even more shocking than the outside. Upon autopsy, they found the digestive tract in perfect condition, and once again, liquid blood in the heart vessels. That makes it the oldest liquid blood ever discovered in the history of science. And alongside the red stuff, they found yellow fluid, 2 liquid urine preserved in the bladder. It shattered every record we have. And what they achieved with these fluids makes the Yuka experiments look like a warm-up. They didn't just extract DNA, they actually grew living tissue cultures from the horse's cells. The team claims this is a massive step toward actually bringing this animal back to life. They have even stated they want to try cloning the creature, though they admit it's a monumental long shot. Because, just a heads up, de-extinction is a lot trickier than the movies make it look. And yes, I said extinct. This isn't a pony you can find today. It's a Lena horse, a species that has completely vanished. These animals roamed the Siberian plains from the deep past right up until about 5,000 years ago. They were smaller than your average modern horse, but they were built like tanks, possessing a stocky, muscular frame designed to survive the brutal Arctic cold. They lived in a deep freeze, with models suggesting temperatures plummeted to -70 degrees Celsius, or -94 degrees Fahrenheit. In other words, it was cold enough to freeze your exposed eye solid in less than 1 minute. Pretty cool, right? And yes, I absolutely intended that pun. It is honestly wild that such a bite-sized, adorable creature could be so incredibly resilient. But that is evolution in action. It is just as impressive that we managed to find such pristinely preserved examples like this foal and the others we covered today. I can only hope that the years to come bring us even more groundbreaking reveals to geek out over. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.